It's a good reel back now. I'm loving it. Unbelievable. I mean, I wasn't aware of it until I was told after I won a Guna, and I mean, I remember winning my very first title, and that felt already so overwhelming, and it was only a small event, and then my first ever World Series event at the time. It wasn't called the Platinum event, and then first world title, and then, you know, and then all of a sudden you've reached 40, and it's something that I would have never dreamt of, so obviously I'm very grateful and very proud. I have very fond memories because I just come fresh off winning the British Junior Open in 2011 in January, and then I took a train to France and I played in Nîmes. The tour at the beginning is a very, very funny place to be at. You know, it's a very small motel, if you may. It's not really a hotel, and it's very cozy. All the players are together, and then you share with whoever the tournament promoter puts you up with. And then I ended up being with Rafi, and we ended up reaching the final, both of us. And obviously he was an age group older than me in juniors, and I'd never played with him, and to play with him was a big deal. And then to come out with a win as well. And then I remember, it's a very funny story that's off topic. The following morning I had to take the train back to Paris, to take the flight from Paris, and I overslept. And my parents were calling, and they tried to contact Rafi, and Rafi was gone, and yeah, but very, very good memories. I had just graduated from college, and I wasn't really decided that I was going to go pro yet. But then I was going to start my military in 3 months' time. So that was the last time I was allowed to travel before I start my military. So I said, I might as well enter my name. I just graduated a month earlier. I was rooming with Karim Hamami, and we ended up drawing each other in the qualification. I won that match, and then you still had to draw the names out of a hat at the time. And Saurav was the #1 seed in India. So obviously it was a big deal, and I ended up drawing him. And I won that in 5, and that was a huge deal because my first ever British Junior Open under 13, Saurav won the under 19. I think it was 27-6 in the final against one of my idols at the time in Egypt, Mahmoud Adel. So Saurav was such a big deal for me. And then I ended up beating him, and then I reached the final, and I beat Nasser Iqbal in the final, I think 11-9 in the 5th. So that was a big, big deal. And then I had to sit out for 6 months. And then 6 months later, I started my full-time professional career. I think the main breakthrough was in San Francisco 4 months earlier. I qualified, and then I drew Greg Gauthier, and I was match ball up. And this is when I started to believe, okay, I can compete with those guys. And then a month later in October, I made it to the quarters of Qatar Classic, which was a platinum event, and then the quarters of the world champs back to back. And this is where I felt like, okay, I belong among these guys. I cannot beat them yet, but I belong among them. And then, you know how the human soul is, I started getting overconfident, and I went to TOC, and I was number 22 in the world at the time, but the closing date had closed before the new rankings, so I was still in the qualifications, and I thought I was gonna have an easy way through to the final, to the main draw, and I ended up losing to Ramit Tandon, who was still a full-time hedge fund employee at the time, and I ended up losing to him, and that was a huge blow. And then a week later, I had to play at the Motor City, and I was crushed in confidence. If I'm not mistaken, I had to draw Diego in the first round. He was a qualifier, and we drew each other. I won in 3, and then I played with Shorbagy in the quarters. And obviously, I played with Shorbagy so many times in the juniors, but I'd never beaten him. It was close, but never beaten him. One in 5, and then I played Castagnier in the semis. And he was the number 3 seed, I think, and I won in 4. And then Nick Matthews in the final. And then Shabana was the technical director of the federation at the time, and I talked to him, gave me a couple of tips that I literally executed exactly how he did, and they paid off really well. So that was a huge breakthrough. And then from that point on, as I said, I felt like I belong here, and now I want to start competing with those guys.
Ali Farag's done it. Ali Farag has made squash history as he greets his wife, Noor El Taib, who's won her first World Series event here at the US Open as well.
I had never made it to a final of a platinum event before. I had just broken through to the top 4, and I was 2-1 down against Mazen in the last 16, 2-1 down against Faris in the quarters. Then semis, I played with Mossad, and I played really well. And then against Muhammad in the final, I didn't think I really stood a chance. First ever final. Muhammad was so experienced already. He'd been world #1 for over 3 years. And then somehow I won in 3. And that was a huge, huge surprise for me. And obviously Noor had won on the same day, and that was a huge breakthrough. Oof. Can't talk through it. It's something that it cannot be described. So I had just got to know world number 1 in January, but it wouldn't have been official until March 1st. And March 1st was the semi-final of that World Championships in Chicago. And I had to play Simon Rosner on the day. And I won in 3. And then Muhammad was the heavy contender at the time, as he always has been. And he lost to Tariq in the semis. And Tariq and I were, I think at the time, maybe locked in at 3-all or 4-all in the head-to-head. So it was quite even going into the final of the World Champs. Both of us had never been there. It was a new experience, and I was very nervous. Noor was playing in the final as well in the women's before me. She ended up not winning. That was tough. But yeah, winning it for the first 10-15 minutes. I remember I was on the phone with my parents and then with my brother, and I remember all 4 of us were crying really hard for like 10 minutes. The first hour or a couple of hours after that was a little tough because of Noor's loss, obviously, because we had a huge, obviously after that feeling at the US Open, we had a huge feeling that we could make it again together, especially at the World Championships. But then obviously a week later, let's say, it starts sinking in that you're a world champion forever, and that was very, very special. So I'd been to 3 British Open finals, one against Muhammad in 2019, and then back-to-back against Paul 21 and 22, and I'd lost all 3 of them. And I was adamant that I was gonna come back and keep trying to win that prestigious event, because I mean, I wouldn't have lost sleep over it that I'd never won the British Open if I finished my career without it, but it's something that you really want to do. And then I was fasting, as you mentioned, but to be fair, that was not a huge deal. The more was my knee. I was still finding my groove back after the knee injury. I'd lost to Mazen the week before at Optasia. I hadn't really been competing with those guys after the injury. I'd played 4 events up until then, and I made the semis of 1 and then lost in the quarters of all the other 3. So I wasn't up there with those guys yet, and that was a huge surprise for me that I was able to put up a good performance one after the other and beat Diego, who was on fire at the time. He had just reached the world number 1 that week. He was winning every event on the tour, really. And after it was probably one of the most ecstatic wins of my career. Oh, US Open 2017, nothing's gonna come close. First ever win with Noor. That first feeling of anything is you cannot really describe it, and I still remember that feeling until this very day. You know, it stays with you for a long time. Now I win an event, I'm extremely happy for a day or 2, and then you have to focus on the next. Obviously at the US Open I had to play the Channel Vase at the time, which is the Optasia now, a couple of days later, but something stayed with me. And then if you really say you belong to those guys, you don't really belong until you win one of those events. And when I won it, I felt like, okay, now I've announced myself to myself, not to anyone else, on this scene, and I started believing that now I can beat those guys consistently.